And with that, I will hand over to Tim, who will point out any things that I might have missed.
No, thank you very much. Thanks, Richard. Hi, I'm Tim Couzens. Just to say up front that I'll be using a script. You'll see why. Some of the descriptions of the furniture in particular are quite detailed, and I can't do it without that. So hopefully that keeps me to time as well. So we'll see how it goes. It's not advancing. There we go. Okay, so I showed you Draycot House. So as Richard said, I'm from Wiltshire originally, and that's one of the other Tilney Long Wellesley estates. I showed you Draycot House last time. So this is Athelhampton House near Dorchester in Dorset. And it's important because it's the only house that's once owned by the Longs of Draycot you can still go and visit today. It's open to the public all year round. And it's really gorgeous gardens. I really recommend it. It was sold by Viscount Wellesley in 1848 to avoid his own bankruptcy, having bailed his father out in 1834. That's the famous William Long Wellesley. Because of this, the records have been dispersed far and wide, and it's taken time to collect in various record offices, the National Archives at Kew, the British Library, and many more. So I only dabble in Wanstead, but I hope that you find my research on tracing the contents of Wanstead House interesting. This is the talk outline for today. And as before, it's deliberately a supplement to Hannah Armstrong's book. I'm going to show two portraits that are in her book for reasons which I'll explain. And for each piece, I'll give the description from the Robbins catalogue and a brief modern version that is either the most up-to-date information or the catalogue entry from a recent, that's probably the last 20 years of sales. For the pieces of furniture in private collections, there'll be an opportunity to guess the price to make it more like the Antiques Roadshow at auction, with the answers given before we move on to the family portraits. That'll be the pause for questions as well. Please don't record this presentation independently. It'll be going on the Friends website on YouTube, so that's taken care of. Take photos or mobile, that's for copyright reasons. Please don't use the snipping tool on your screens. The first talk is available, and I've got it open as well. So if there's any questions that refer back to the original one, I can reshare that. So a disclaimer, I'm a geophysicist. I'm not an art or furniture historian. So anything presented here comes from a long period of discussion and learning from experts rather than any professional qualification of my own. There's a long list of experts in the acknowledgements at the end of the talk. This slide was in the first talk, but it's worth repeating. I've got a full set of photos of the 1795 Wanstead House inventory, which you can see on the left-hand side here. And transcription is now complete for that, with a few corrections and exceptions. You can see that it's labelled Exhibit A, since it was impounded in one of the Long Wellesley Chancery lawsuits in the late 1820s, and that's preserved it at the archives at Kew. On the right-hand side is the front cover of the first Robbins Cell catalogue of 1822. I've got hard copy of the Redbridge version and two digital versions from the Newham copy. These are important since some of the purchases are marked and there are some differences between the annotations. I also have a scan of the second Robbins Cell from September 1822, and we'll discuss the significance of that with the hall chairs. Transcription is only complete for the traced items from the Robbins catalogue, which is probably less than 5% of the total. and other people are still working on it as well. The comparison between the 1795 and 1822 catalogues show which furniture was original to the house and which was added either in the mid-18th century or the pieces that were purchased by William and Catherine Long Wellesley after 1812. This talk, like the first one, will include both types. So unlike last time, there's only one item of furniture from a public collection that you can go and see today. This settee, one of a pair, is from the Ionic Temple at Rievaulx Abbey in Yorkshire, which is National Trust. It was previously thought to be a copy, but research showed it to be by William Kent, and as such, it was a last-minute addition to the exhibition at the V&A in 2014. There were at least 8 of these settees at Wanstead. 6 are now at Wilton House, and I showed one slightly obscured in the previous talk. You can see the central mask of a woman, probably a Roman goddess of the hunt, Diana, sitting on the crest of the settee's back with a acanthus scrolls embellishing the arms and legs, and 2 large-scale sphinxes supporting the seat. The sumptuous Grecian scroll back and end sofa, lot 28, from the ballroom, sold for £102 to Ward. Now we're on to private collections. And the point that I want to make is even what I'm calling leftovers from the Wanstead sale can make huge amounts of money at auction at the present time, which is a clue for guessing the prices realized. This solid metal gilt ornamental chain was used to hang the chandeliers in the Grand Hall. When they were modified by Vulliamy, as they're shown now on the right-hand side, and placed in the new sculpture gallery at Chatsworth, the ceiling was much lower and only half the chain was required. So it languished in the granary store until the attic sale of 2010. It's 6 meters long, 20 feet. So it gives some idea of the double height dimensions of the Grand Hall at Wanstead. And while we're on the subject of chandeliers, the massive 36 light chandelier from the Grand Saloon was bought in and has never been traced. So more work is needed for that lot, unless it was destroyed in the Tottenham Street fire, store fire of 1834. Guess the price of the chain. Another point to make is that the fate of the traced Wanstead items is usually a happy one, but there are exceptions. We've discussed the collections at Wilton and Chatsworth, where great care is taken by a dedicated team of curators. For many years, 2 chimney pieces from Wanstead were thought to be at Chillingham Castle in Northumberland, from a mid-19th century watercolour on the left-hand side here. This gives us the opportunity to see what the interiors of Wanstead could have resembled, which is why I chose it as the poster for this talk. But on the right-hand side is what the Great Hall looks like now at Chillingham today. It's not clear if the chimney pieces have been removed. It's been suggested that these are fiberglass and that the Wanstead marble is behind them. I don't know if that's true or not. Other traced chimney pieces from Wanstead are in the backup part of this presentation. One of the best academic studies on Wanstead is by Cater and Rock of Christie's in 2007, and the next 3 slides come from that paper. This was one of a pair from the Grand Ballroom. It wasn't in the 1795 inventory, so was one of William Long Wellesley's purchases, probably in Paris. Robbins describes it as a splendid ebony frame antique marquetry and bull pier table, beautifully finished in various devices of flowers, etc., with drawer in the frame, shelf and back under to correspond, on 6 costly square firmed pillars, superbly mounted with rich chased ormolu ram's heads That's here. And other ornaments and mouldings. French feet, 4 feet wide. And that went for £45, 3 shillings each, and to Fogg. This one was probably acquired by Earl de Grey of Newby in Rest Park, and was one of several purchases by him at the sale, which require further research. It passed to Lord Revelstoke, which is the Baring family, at a Christie's sale in 1843. Unfortunately, I don't know where it is today. This is rather a complicated slide, largely because William Long Wellesley bought so many wardrobes that it's difficult to trace them all. As described last time, you have to be careful with the dimensions and the full description to match Wanstead pieces. In this case, just a little bit of gilt on the base, for example, here, can make all the difference. Robbins from the ballroom, a magnificent ebony frame bull and tortoiseshell antique Parisian armoire with rich pierced brass Gothic gallery around the top, fitted up inside with shelves lined crimson Genoa velvet, enclosed in a centre by panelled door and plate glass door on either side, with costly rich chased ornaments and mouldings, the ends to correspond on French feet. That went for £37, 16 shillings to Gom. This one passed through Christie's in 2007. A very similar one, type 2, was illustrated in Hannah's book. That was a Louis XIV ormolu mounted ebony brass simulated tortoiseshell and bull marqueterie Bibliothèque Basse by André Charles Boulle, about 1700, and that was included in a Christie's sale of 2012. Bottom right is a Parisian bull armoire from the blue damask state bedchamber. This had been purchased at the Van Horn sale in Paris, and a third armoire, top right, of a different size, came from the same collection. That was purchased by George IV in 1825 and is now at Windsor Castle. Returning to the bottom right, this was sold from the Wildenstein collection at Christie's in 2005 and retains the red sandalwood or sandalwood in interior. You can see the red wood here. So now you can even get a smell of Wanstead House. None of these were in the 1795 inventory, and the blue damask bedchamber was completely refurbished after 1812. The location of the Wanstead pieces are unknown. Guess the price of these items. These are much easier examples. From Robbins, the Grand Hall, a curious and truly valuable antique Parisian ebony frame tortoiseshell and bull barometer with shield, shape, dial, plate and enamelled index, superbly mounted and ornamented in beautiful rich chased ormolu, decorated with anchor, shell, lion's head, leaf and lobster. You can see the lobsters down at the bottom here. A curious and truly valuable antique Parisian ebony frame tortoiseshell and bull thermometer to correspond. They went for £16, 5 shillings, 6pence each to Hewitt. According to Cater and Rock, the remarkable thermometer and barometer were with aquatic motifs were made for the Comte de Toulouse. He was the Grand Admiral of France, son of Louis XIV and Madame de Montespan, circa 1720. They're now owned by the Banque de France, so they've returned to Paris, where they were probably purchased by William Long Wellesley. I don't have a price for those. Anyway, moving on. Slide 12. Well, we've had the blue damask, and now we're on to the crimson velvet, another state bedchamber, not one which was renovated. So it's no surprise to find an original Kent pier table there, as described in the 1795 inventory. So Robbins calls this a grand, massive, carved and gilt framed pier table, top lined crimson Genoa velvet and beautiful broad carved border, supported by costly spread eagle on square molded plinths, with lion's head and shield ornaments in the centre, 5 feet 3 inches wide. That went for £20, 10 shillings to penning. As discussed last time, the spread eagle comes from the Tilney crest. Although it was quite commonly used by Kent, it now has an associated top of veneered alabaster. You can see that in the centre here. A pier table matching this description passed through Sotheby's Treasures, Lot 4, from the Hamilton House collection in 2021. A George II carved gilt wood side table, probably to a design by William Kent and executed by James Richards, circa 1730. The provenance included time with the Jervis family of Herriot Park in Hampshire. That's quite near to Tilney Hall, so it would be worth checking for other pieces from that house since it was only demolished in 1965. The auction notes mention a related pier table at Wilton, so I've put those from last time in backup. The current location is unknown, and guess the price of this item. I've included the hexagonal table, but this is problematic, as I'll explain. Robbins called this a costly sexagon black shell marble top conversation table, U-frame and bronze column supports with rich chased winged and leaf ornaments and deep hollow shaped mahogany plinth and casters, £25, 4 shillings. It went to a general, the actual name is illegible in both catalogues. As you can see, it's now has a rather wrecked top, and it's not of black shell marble, but of mahogany. It passed through Christie's in 2012 as an Empire ormolu mounted yew wood and mahogany hexagonal centre table attributed to Jacob Frere, circa 1800. The location is unknown. Guess the price of this item. The mahogany table from the steward's room is a little bit like the chandelier chain. It's a very, very ordinary piece, and it's from the staff rather than the family rooms, but the provenance of Wanstead still added a huge value to it. Another clue for those that are guessing for the Antiques Roadshow part. Robbins described it as an elegant mahogany library table, top lined with purple leather, a broad gilt border. You can see that that's been replaced. 6 drawers in the frame and 2 swivel ditto at each end, locks and keys on 8 massive carved and moulded scroll truss legs and casters. That went for £5, 15 shillings in the Robbins sale. A very similar table was traced to Boughton Monchelsea Place in Kent and shown in situ in an undated photo. After a spell in America, it was last known in the collection of the Honourable Simon Sainsbury. Guess the price of this item. There were at least 3 sets of hall chairs at Wanstead, and the ones in the entrance lobby are in Hannah's book, and I have those in backup. And there were others in the colonnade outside the workrooms on the ground floor. But this set, 4 of 12, were in the grand hall, where they had been moved from the lobby, although original to the house. Robbins describes them as 4 capital hollow shield-back wainscot form framed hall chairs, beautifully painted in flowers, and circular panel in front painted with the arms, etc. They went for £4, 4 shillings or £6, 6 shillings to Jones. So that means that they were bought in the first sale as heirlooms because they had the family crest on them. But then they were included in the second Robbins sale of September 1822. So that's when they left Wanstead. A pair passed through Lawrence's of Crewken, that's the auctioneers, in 2003, where they were described as a pair of oak hall chairs, each back painted with a floral spray with a scroll and mask cartouche, the front panel with a coat of arms for Richard Child, created Viscount Castlemaine in 1718 and Earl Tilney in 1731. The crest is an Earl's coronet, just see it here. So that must post date 1731. Because there was no mention of Wanstead in the catalogue for the later sale, there was the possibility that they came from Tilney Hall, but the match to the description is so good that there's no doubt that these are survivors from Wanstead. This resulted in a bargain price. Their current location is unknown. Guess the price of these items. Now we're going outside to the greenhouse, and the immediate problem is that they're not mentioned in either of the Robbins catalogue or the 1795 inventory. The hothouse and greenhouse were described in the inventory, but just contained gardening items. The contents of the greenhouse were sold in 1799 prior to demolition, but neither the catalogue nor newspaper advertisements mentions the roundels shown here. Nevertheless, I can't see why one of these should have the inscription on the back Wanstead 1795, unless the Coldstone factory had access to a marble original after the decision to take the greenhouse down had been made. They represent 4 seasons, which is appropriate to the setting. If we have time, we can discuss the other bas-reliefs on the exterior of the greenhouse and the other roof ornaments. There's a picture for that in backup. The location of the Coldstone casts and the Wanstead originals are unknown. Guess the price of these items. So for this item, I should emphasize that there's no evidence to date that it came from the house, just that it has a picture of Wanstead on the inside of the lid. It's described as a Meissen gold-mounted table snuff box, 1750 to 1755, slightly larger than a typical pocket snuff box. The interior of the domed cover painted with a view of Wanstead House, showing the west front courtyard with its ha-ha and elaborate railings ornamented with urns and obelisks. Manners, that's the seller, recently thought that this was taken from an engraving found in Colin Campbell's Vitruvius Britannicus, but it's more likely that it celebrates contemporary improvements to the west front, particularly in the courtyard. The exterior of the box, with the bunches of German flowers. When alerted to this lot, I contacted the seller and discussed the possibility of a visit by John II Earl Tilney to the Meissen factory, and I still think that it's possible that he went. Unfortunately, in the letters, there's no evidence for this in his correspondence, but he was on tour of Germany at the time. He wrote to Sir Robert Long in March 1754 from Hamburg. We are very graciously received by the Duke and Duchess of Brunswick, dined and supped there almost every day. Besides, we had some French plays acted and one ball on Her Royal Highness's birthday. My old acquaintance, Mr. Cope, our resident here, has been extremely polite to us, having passed a few days with us, and we have been with him at this place always since. Tonight he gives a little kind of ball. 2 days ago, we paid our respects to the Duchess of Holstein, mother to the present King of Sweden, who keeps a kind of court here, and with whom I had the honor to play at quadrille, and afterwards she gave us a very handsome supper. So with associates like that, I can't see why he wouldn't have taken a detour to the Meissen factory just outside Dresden. Guess the price of this item. And while we're showing porcelain here, it's here's some more. and definitely from Wanstead this time. A great advantage is that the armorial dinner services have heraldry on them, which is relatively easy to identify. Unfortunately, the china is one of the exceptions in the 1795 inventory. I haven't done the transcript for that yet. Some more work is required. These are a Chinese export soup plate, 2 chargers, both circa 1735, and a familial rose dish. They passed through New York from the Hodroff collection in 2007 and 2008, where the arms were correctly described, the same as the hall chairs. Guess the price of these items. So now we're going to pause. If you've got any questions, now's your opportunity. And if we want to look in the chat tool, if there are any questions there. If there aren't, we'll go on to the answers for the prices of the items. But anyway, questions on the furniture? Anything in chat?
Well, I posted an observation. I'm not sure if anyone except Adrian can see it. Mice and snuff box image looks very similar to an illustration in Lawrence, Essex.
Yes, I think that's where he got it from. I think he either got that sent on to the Meissen factory or took it with him.
Right.
Yeah, it's not an exceptional image, but what it does show is all those alterations that he'd just done, that he was very proud of. So I think that's what it celebrates, and I'm absolutely convinced that he commissioned the snuff box, even though there's nothing in the letters saying I've just been to the Meissen factory and ordered one. I don't know what Meissen's records are like, whether they keep records for commissions.
No idea about that. There are a couple of observations. Jill, I think it's Jill, says the furniture looks to modern eyes to be rather blingy. Was it so then?
Very blingy. So yeah, particularly the Kent. You know, that they've mellowed. Most of the Kent, there's some which have been regilded, but most of them from the 1730s they've mellowed. They would have been incredibly bright, and if they had any embroidery on the seats of any of the chairs, that would have been incredibly bright as well. So we're not dealing with the pictures other than family portraits last time. They were chosen for their colors, and so were the tapestries. So the whole thing was designed to look really bright. And then even that wasn't sufficient for William Long Wellesley, so he decided to go around gilding the house itself. He was putting gold leaf up all the way around the ballroom and on anything that didn't move. He wanted
Yes.
a uniform scene of burnished gold.
Yes, to
So,
rival
yeah.
Carlton House, someone said.
Yes.
Someone asks, do extensive records from Robin's auction survive? I assume this is in addition to the surviving catalogues.
No, this is it.
Right.
So there are many catalogues, but there are and they have variable amounts of annotation in them, but there aren't any auction letter either. Well, there are a few letters from Robin's and a few descriptions with family members going to the sales. There's nothing from Robin's itself.
Yeah, Greg Roberts says, I have one of the auctioneer's copies with marked up sale prices.
Yeah, there's a lot of those. but there aren't any separate Robins records.
Yes. Some years ago, I started an exercise of trying to identify who some of the buyers were. And certainly some of them were relatives and business associates of Robbins himself.
Yeah.
Many were not identifiable.
Yeah.
Many people would have sent servants or representatives who would have bought in their own names, and so
exactly.
we would never know who the ultimate purchaser was.
Yeah.
Right, we have a few more things coming in. I am not an expert at this, so excuse me if I ask a stupid question, but what does I have put this in backup mean? So
they're slides which we'll get to if we've got time. They're slides at the end of the presentation.
All right, so that's easy enough. In case Tim has time to add it. Oh, right, that's Greg answered the question already. Marilyn, where we try to guess the old prices, where possible, can you tell us modern prices at auction?
Okay.
Well, that's what.
Here we go. Okay, so the Chatsworth chandelier chain, that had a pre-sale estimate of between £5,000 and £8,000. The Boule armoires, the Christie's 2007 was €288,000. Christie's 2012 was $266,500. And the one from the Wildenstein collection, Christie's 2005, was $1,016,000. The Hamilton pier table pre-sale estimate was £150,000 to £250,000. The hexagonal table went for $70,850. The steward's room mahogany table, unbelievably, in 1988 went for $165,000. The painted hall chairs, they were a bargain. Pre-sale estimate of £800 to £1,200. And that wasn't each, that was for the set. The Coldstone roundels, £7,650 for the set. The Meissen snuff box was offered for £12,000. I don't know what the end price was. The Tilney armorial chargers, the soup plate was $2,000 and two chargers were $7,200. Okay, so now on to the pictures. One of the great benefits of tracing pictures from Wanstead House to public institutions is the Art UK website. This makes pictures, gallery descriptions, and provenance information easily available and searchable. It's important because it gets quite complicated quickly, even with the family portraits. There are several versions of some of the family portraits, some replicated by the artists themselves, some studio copies, and possibly some later copies. Unlike the Robbins catalogue, where pictures had been removed from the walls, the 1795 inventory lists the important ones in situ. More importantly, the inventory is better for the identities of the sitters. Much of that was either lost or confused by the time of the Robbins sale. So this is one of at least three versions of the Riley portrait of Sir Josiah Child. In 1795 inventory, it was in room number 50, which was a functional dressing room on the ground floor, with a large collection of the smaller family portraits. The Robbins catalogue, because of the red robes, confused it with a portrait of Judge Hale. This version passed through the Philip Mould Gallery in 2008. There's another version at Portsmouth Museums and another in the National Portrait Gallery, which was the one that Tanner used in her book. There was possibly a fourth, which was at Draycot House until 1863, when it passed into Lady Victoria Long Wellesley's picture collection. although that could be this one that went through Philip Mould's gallery. For this slide, it's important to note that none of them are from Wanstead House, although they may have hung there briefly. All three are at Birdsall House in Yorkshire, which is open as a wedding venue. And all three are either by or after Sir Godfrey Kneller. On the left is Emma Willoughby, the third wife of Sir Josiah Child. And well, I don't know what to say. True to type, Josiah certainly married her for her money. In the centre is Cassandra Willoughby, Sir Josiah Child's stepdaughter. And on the right is Thomas Willoughby, the stepson, both of whom had a very difficult relationship with Sir Josiah. They come from Rosemary O'Day's book, which is about the Willoughbys, particularly Cassandra's diaries and letters, which mentions some of the important records from Wollerton Hall at the University of Nottingham. These need to be checked once they've been restored. At the end of the presentation, if I've got time, portraits of Elizabeth Howland and Rebecca, the Marchioness of Worcester, Sir Josiah Child's daughters by his first and second wives. Also in backup is the portrait of Colonel John Bullock of Falkbourne Hall by Thomas Gainsborough. This is the second portrait that was included in Hannah's book. And the reason for repeating it here is for an appeal for the companion oval portrait of Dorothy Glynn. Since they date to 1703 to 05, they were probably a marriage pair, and they had been kept together until 2001, when the unframed portrait of Dorothy was sold in advance of the main auction. They hung in the same dressing room as the portrait of Richard's father. Robbins simply says, "Richardson, a portrait of a gentleman in blue," and went for £10, 10 shillings to Gombe. By 2001, this had been misattributed to the Circle of Michael Dahl. And just to add to the confusion, there's an inscription on the stretcher at the back saying that it's by Kneller. All was resolved by an article for the Georgian Group Journal by Peter Brown and Miles Barton in 2011. And you're seeing the picture now after cleaning and restoration. Now, going back 2 generations to Dorothy's grandparents, we have the picture of Lord Justice Glynn and family circa 1655. This large picture had hung in the dining room, south end of the Grand Hall at Wanstead. Robbins calls it by Wissing, portrait of Judge Hale, which he's crossed out and put Glynn and family. So again, with the confusion on the sitters, and that went for £61, 19 shillings to Jones. So that went into the Robbins store with the other heirlooms and didn't resurface until the Christie's sale of 1851. It's not known when it arrived at its current location, just outside the Great Hall of Lincoln's Inn in London. The attribution has recently changed from Willem Wissing to a follower of Gerard Soust. I've seen that picture at a Christmas event. It's very nice. The main group portrait for Sir Horace Mann's house at Florence by Thomas Patch is in Hannah's book. So I've included this preparatory ink sketch. You can see that he takes after his grandmother. The other Horace, Walpole, was very rude about how ugly he was. Until recently, it was on loan from the Fry collection at the Yale Centre for Studies in British Art in London. But it was sold at Sotheby's in 2021, and just this small sketch had a pre-sale estimate of between £12,000 and £18,000. There are a few letters from Thomas Patch in the long correspondence that I've transcribed, but nothing in them determines the exact relationship between Patch and Tilney. In July 1770, he wrote to Sir James Tilney Long from Florence about some marble chimney pieces that were destined for Draycot House, and added, "His lordship is at the Baths of Pisa, where he has been for these last 3 weeks past, and will remain till the arrival of Mr. Cox," that's the attorney lawyer, "who I find is expected the latter end of this month. And we have here at present Thomas Hesketh and his lady," and then he lists everybody else that's been visiting. "Sir Horace charges me to present you with his best regards." They must have been closer than that. There was at least 2 probable pictures by Patch at Draycot House in the 1828 sale catalogue there, and that was a view of the coast of Naples and Vesuvius during a volcanic eruption, and a caricature of some celebrated person, as it was then described, who was represented in the form of a bull. The latter, in print form, is now described as a self-portrait of Patch, and that's in backup for later if we have time. These are quite well-known pictures. On the left, we've got Josiah Child, the younger brother of John, the second Earl Turney, and he obviously lucked out in the Child genetic lottery, quite a good-looking gent, and he obviously liked dressing up. His elopement with the wife of a local merchant, Mrs. Wymansold, Henrietta on the right-hand side here, is also well known from Jane Brown's book. There are a few mentions of the affair and the correspondence between Tilney and Sir Robert Long, but nothing which dramatically changes that story, mostly just additional financial burdens of the Wymansold divorce and the avoidance of a criminal conversation trial. These portraits have been preserved via connection with the St. John family of Lydia Park in Swindon, which is open to the public, so you can go and have a look at them. One's a pastel. This is a composite slide of Draycot and possibly Wanstead portraits. To the left and right, we've got Sir Robert Long and Lady Emma Child Long by John Vanderbank, circa 1738. They're too late to be marriage portraits, but they are a pair and they're still together, or were when they last sold. Since the set included Sir Robert's sister Dorothy, they were probably instigated by the Longs. They were at Draycot House until 1863, then in the collection of Lady Victoria Long Wellesley in 1896, but they weren't sent to Rood Ashton with the other Long family portraits. That's a house in Wiltshire, also owned by the Longs, different branch. In 1999, they resurfaced at Phillips, and it's taken a while to track down these decent colour photos. The current location is unknown. Once Lady Emma has been identified on the right-hand side, it's possible to compare her on the Hogarth, the Nollekins and others that was dealt with last time. Now, I'll admit that the resemblance is not great to this central portrait, but there is a chance that this is Robin's Highmore, which was one of 7 by him at Wanstead House, a portrait of a lady holding a bunch of flowers, only £1 19 shillings to Jones, which meant that it was bought in as an heirloom. And like those, it was sold at Christie's in 1851. A portrait of a lady in a blue dress holding a garland of flowers, standing before a balustrade with columns, and landscape with roses and a bird to the right, 1735, which quite closely matches this picture and the year that she married Sir Robert Long. It was sold from the Thulier Gallery in 2007. Lastly, there was 15 slides, 15 pictures, by Joseph Nollekins at the Elder at Wanstead, not just the interior of the saloon. The problem is that he's not mentioned at all in the 1795 inventory. Despite this, I think that there is a small chance that 4 in the Paul Mellon collection at Yale in the States are from Wanstead. I identify this picture with Robins, Nollekins, a landscape with buildings and a fountain. There's your fountain. enriched with elegant figures, £7 to Jameson. So this wasn't bought in. There's some resemblance between the spinet player here and Countess Tilney of the saloon group. The garden features match those at Wanstead, but not this arcade. It would be expected that Robbins would have described the spinet player as well as the fountain if this was right. So that this is where the doubt creeps in for that one. And the other pictures by Nollekins are in backup. So for time, I'm going to go through the conclusions now. The furniture collection from Wanstead is just a gift that keeps on giving. The Hamilton Kent pier table turned up while I was searching for a picture credit on a completely different piece. And less than 5% of the Robbins lots have been traced. As before, care needs to be taken with the detailed descriptions and dimensions to prove a Wanstead provenance. That's particularly the case with that hexagonal table. I'm absolutely fine that it's definitely by the same maker, it's out of the same factory or workshop, but the top is completely different. So I don't think that one actually came out of Wanstead House. Wanstead has got such a reputation that even leftovers or fairly modest pieces command a premium at auction houses, but just occasionally a bargain can still be found. Tracing the family portraits is hampered by the high turnover of staff at Wanstead House between 1795 and 1822, the loss of the oral tradition. So what I mean with that, that's just Wanstead was always open to the public, and it was the housekeeper's job to show people around. They just learnt who all of these pictures were, and as they guided around and answered people's questions. And that was lost, and that's why tracing items from Robbins is so difficult. The other thing is that after a while he gets very non-specific, so you get tens of portraits of a lady in a blue mantle, and obviously that's impossible, which is like the silver, where there's no hallmarks, just the weight. So that makes it really difficult to trace those. Nevertheless, as the recent discussion about the Van der Smissen portrait has shown, it only takes an old description or a back label to get Wanstead get us back to Wanstead. Connoisseurship can usually identify the artist, and then it's just a case of comparison and integration, tracing backwards with the provenance from the picture that's in discussion at the present time, and forwards from the purchasers that were annotated in the Robbins catalogue. And the same thing applies to the furniture. And obviously we hope that this 5% count keeps on going up. I won't read all of the many acknowledgements, I'll leave those up while we discuss any questions for the last 10 minutes. If not, I'll check and we can go on to the backup, the slides for later. Otherwise, thank you very much for the opportunity to show you this part of the traced Wanstead collection. There's a little more, but not enough for a third talk at the moment. And I'll let you know when another talk is ready, possibly in the autumn, depending on how the other history of Draycot goes on. Questions, and if no questions, we'll go on to the backup slides.
There are a couple of questions. Thank you for the talk. Amazing detective work. Can you talk a bit about your process for identifying pieces? That's from Niti.
Yeah. So you, with both pictures and furniture, the first thing is the size. So and you have to be exactly precise. So within a couple of inches, and what you find for the ones that are known, Robin's measurements are very accurate. So he wasn't rushed. He wasn't inaccurate as he went around the house measuring things. The only difference is, you can imagine, do you take the widest piece for a furniture? So there's some leeway, but it's only a couple of inches, and that's really important. And it's exactly the same with the pictures. Are they on canvas? Is it oval? Is it in its original frame? Who could it have been mistaken for in between whiles? How detailed is the description? Is there anything in the background that is specific or generic? Obviously, with lots of portraits, there's a generic studio background which repeats itself loads of times. So then that doesn't help you. So that you have to look for something specific. And comparison with other known portraits, particularly for the family ones.
Greg Roberts says, would like to place on record a big thanks to Tim for his extremely extensive research, which keeps Wanstead House and its treasures open to us all.
Thanks, Greg.
So, Tim, if you want to show some of your overflow material.
Yeah, okay. We'll keep an eye on the time.
Oh,
this
there's someone in the waiting room. They're very late indeed.
They came out and then back in again.
Okay.
So you've got two of the traced fireplaces. One's in America. They're both in America. The one on the left-hand side is in Hannah's book, so just look for that for the description. Carlton Hobbs is the auction house. I think both of them are Kent fireplaces. This is the double cube room and the colonnade room in Wilton. So that's another of the sofas, and on the right hand side, that's the pier table that is mentioned in the National Trust Guide. So that's also by Kent and is a probable from Wanstead. Most of the items there are either chairs or sofas, but I'm fairly convinced that they've got two of the pier tables, probably two pairs. Here's the other one. You can see with the shell ornaments, but they've got different tops to them. So again, you have to take allowances. You can imagine that some of the tops do get cracked and then they're replaced, and particularly with the working tables. So there's some uncertainty there, but the dimensions and descriptions of those pier tables, I'm sure those are also from Wanstead. This is the other set of hall chairs. So this is the plain set. So those were the working ones. So the ones that I showed earlier were the ornamental ones. This is where you actually sat down and waited for Earl Tilney when you had some business, when you came to pay your rent, or when he inquired as to why your rent was late. This is the greenhouse. You can see it had all of these ornaments, and I don't know whether they were stone or lead. I think probably lead, but these are, and I don't know exactly what the scenes are, but I would assume that those are marble inserts. Most of the rest of it was stuccoed red brick before it was demolished. But obviously these are rectangle, they're not roundels. So the roundels must have been inside or on the opposite side of the greenhouse. Possibly they were in the banyo. There was a plunge pool and a hot one here and a cold one here on either side for having a bath. Strange place to have it, but obviously they needed to heat it. So good place for the hot version. But these must be somewhere. That they'll turn up, possibly even with Codestone copies of them taken from the original. And I guess those are marble.
There was an eagle from the greenhouse which was turned up in a castle in Ireland. I can't remember if it was you who told me that or somebody else. I haven't even got
it wasn't me, it
it
must be somewhere else, so I'll email you about that. That's great. That just exactly proves my point. This is Elizabeth Howland. So this is where's the Duke of Bedford's? Woburn. I don't have a colour version. I keep meaning to ask Woburn for a colour copy. They'll have one somewhere. This is from Lambeth Records by the link to Streatham. And there were loads of versions of this portrait of the Marchioness of Worcester by Peter Lely. There's at least 3 of those. That's just the nicest version of the colour. And it's also been used for prints, so that there's prints of that one as well. This is the Gainsborough. So this is John Bullock of Falkbourne. Absolutely amazing picture. So that's in the Blanton Museum of Art in Texas at the moment. Heaven alone knows how much it's worth. I think it's one of Gainsborough's best. Anyway, so it was too distant for inclusion because he's not exactly direct family. He's a second cousin. This is the patch. So you can see in the background here, these are the pictures of fireworks, but there was also other pictures of Vesuvius going off. He did loads of those. That was his thing for the tourist trade. So it was no surprise that one went to Draycot House, obviously gifted. When Sir James or Sir Robert or Sir James's brother all made grand tours, so there's plenty of opportunities to get them. And here's John with his nice peachy pink outfit on, which was come from the sketch.
He ran into Edward Gibbon on his travels, who described him as short and fat with little to recommend him.
Well, there you are. He was certainly fat. I don't know how tall he was. This is the self-portrait. Very, very strange. I think that must have amused Sir Robert Long. You can see why nobody would have thought that that was Thomas Patch. But if you see a portrait of him, you can see why it's still called a self-portrait. What the illusion is and why he's a bull, I've got no idea. I don't know. Those are one of these illusions that is just lost in the mists of time. And lastly, these are the other Nolkins. So they're all from Robbins. They've got the page and catalogue number. Players at Teetotum. Don't know exactly what that is. It's a youngster's game. I'm assuming that these are Nollekins' children rather than children of the Tilney family. And he did have lots of children, one of which was the sculptor. So Joseph Nollekins, the younger, became a very famous sculptor. Obviously, they had a a whale of a time going around the house, using it as their play area. This is Blind Man's Buff. So you can see that they've got the mask on and children playing with a hobby horse. And those are the three that are in Yale. And I'm fairly certain that those are out of Wanstead House. They haven't changed the description on their website yet, but it does mention that he was, Earl Tilney was his biggest commissioner. So I can't remember what the total was. Richard, do you know that there was between 15 and 20 Nollikinses
I can't
in
remember.
the catalogue?
I can't
It's
remember.
a lot. So it wouldn't be any great surprise that these are from Wanstead, whether that's Wanstead Church in the background, and then you have to get into what artistic license he's using, because that arch is nowhere to be found. So the same thing applies to that arcade, but I'm fairly certain that the harpsichord player there looks so like Countess Tilney that it's this weird hybrid of some real and some artistic license. That's just another picture of Sir Robert Long. That was Rosalba Carey area. That's the pastel that was done by on his grand tour of 1732. He was there with the Strangeways families of Malbury. That's his cousins, and another pastel. Lovely portrait. Okay, that's it. We're 5 minutes over, but I'm happy to take any more questions, anything in chat. And if not, we can wrap.
So, members of the audience, speak now or forever hold your peace. For those of you who may have missed parts of the talk, there are one or two people coming and going and some who arrived late. We will be posting a recording onto our YouTube channel in the fairly near future, within the next couple of days. I have put the address in the chat, but if you search for Friends of Wanstead Parklands on YouTube, you will find it easily enough. And as there don't seem to be any other questions, I think it just remains me to thank Tim on behalf of everyone for another very interesting talk. I've learned a good deal, and I'm sure we all have. So thank you very much indeed.
Okay, there's a question. Did she give her name to the Howland Dock? Yes, she did. It's the same family.
All right. So
okay,
I think that's a wrap. Thank you very much.
thanks everybody.